Listen carefully, because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just a history lesson. It's a reminder of how something small, something fragile, something weak can one day rise to shake the entire world. And the craziest part? America didn't start as a superpower, not even close. It started as a scared collection of colonies, confused people, broken systems, and an enemy so powerful that even saying the word rebellion felt like suicide. But what happens when ordinary people reach the point where fear stops working? What happens when a man realizes that his dignity, his land, his children's future are slipping through someone else's fingers? He fights. Even if he knows he might lose, even if he knows the enemy is stronger, and that's exactly where the story of America's military rise begins. Not with power, not with glory, but with desperation. In the early 1770s, the land that would one day become the United States wasn't a country at all. It was a cluster of 13 colonies, each with different interests, different cultures, and different problems. People woke up every morning under British rule, paid British taxes, lived under British laws, and obeyed British soldiers marching through their towns like they owned every street. Some people accepted it, some pretended not to care, and some quietly clenched their fists every time a red-coated soldier walked by. In taverns and workshops, whispers grew. Why are we paying taxes with no voice? Why are British ships taking our goods? How long will we live like servants in our own land? These weren't the whispers of politicians. These were the whispers of fishermen, farmers, blacksmiths, and simple townspeople who suddenly realized something is wrong. And once a people start to feel wronged, history starts to move. But nobody imagined a war. Nobody thought 13 tiny colonies could stand against the world's strongest empire. It would be like a child trying to fight a giant. Still, anger is a strange thing. Once it catches fire, it keeps spreading. By 1775, tensions exploded at Lexington and Concord. Nobody knows who fired the first shot. Was it a nervous soldier, a panicked farmer, a misfire? We'll never know, but that single gunshot echoed across the world. Boom! The revolution had begun. The British marched in perfect formation, drums beating, redcoats glowing under the morning sun. Their discipline was terrifying, their confidence unshakable. They looked like machines built for war. The colonists? They looked nothing like an army. They wore mismatched clothes. They had rusty muskets. They didn't march in lines. They hid behind trees, rocks, and fences. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't noble. It wasn't the proper way to fight. But they fought anyway. Because when survival is the goal, rules become optional. British generals called them cowards. The colonists called it strategy. And slowly, unbelievably, it worked. The British would push forward in organized lines only to be hit by quick, scattered shots, and before they could turn around, the colonists were gone, melted into the forest. This was the first lesson America learned in war. You don't have to be the strongest. You just have to be unpredictable. But unpredictable militias couldn't win a full war. Everyone felt that. Everyone knew it. If America wanted real freedom, it needed something more. It needed an army, a real one. So the impossible began, building an army from nothing. Imagine men who had never held a proper weapon suddenly drilling in open fields under burning sun or freezing snow. Imagine farmers waking up hours before sunrise to train for a war they weren't even sure they could win. Imagine marching barefoot, each step cutting into the cold ground until the skin tore open, blood mixing with snow. These weren't soldiers. These were men who became soldiers because the alternative was slavery. Some fainted from hunger, some deserted from fear, some froze in winter camps, dying quietly with no grave, no glory, no final words. But the army grew. Not because it had resources, because it had resolve. And then something unexpected happened. France noticed. They saw a young nation that refused to break. They saw passion, fire, stubbornness, and potential. So France stepped in. Guns, ships, supplies, trained officers. And suddenly, the world's greatest empire wasn't facing scattered militias anymore. They were facing a rising force. By 1783, the unimaginable became real. The colonies won, and America was born. But let me tell you a truth that many ignore. Winning a war doesn't make you strong. Surviving afterward does. America entered independence poor, exhausted, divided, and carrying the scars of sacrifice. The war had taken everything: money, lives, stability. There was no real military, just a tiny force and a desperate need for structure. But America had something else, something more important: ambition. In the decades that followed, the Industrial Revolution arrived like a storm. Factories exploded across the landscape. Steam engines roared. Iron replaced wood. Steel replaced iron. And machines began to reshape the nation's identity. Every factory, every furnace, every locomotive whispered a new possibility. War will never be the same again. Musket lines were becoming rifles, ships were becoming iron monsters, communication was becoming instant, and America was absorbing every lesson. Railroads spread across the land like veins carrying blood. Telegraph lines hung like flickering nerves vibrating with information. For the first time in history, a message could travel faster than a horse. Decisions that once took days now took minutes. War was no longer about who had the most men. It was about who moved the fastest, who communicated the quickest, who supplied the smartest. America was learning how to fight before the next fight came, and that next fight would be the most painful in its entire history. A war not against an enemy across the sea, but an enemy across the street. The Civil War. A war that ripped families apart. A war where brothers stood on opposite sides of battlefields loading rifles with shaking hands. A war where farms became graveyards and towns became ashes. If the Revolution birthed America, the Civil War forced it to grow up. Because this war was different. This war introduced technology no one had imagined before. Ironclad ships that couldn't burn, rifles that fired farther and faster, trains carrying entire armies overnight, telegraphs sending battlefield orders instantly, trenches turning open fields into horror zones. It was brutal, it was mechanical, it was modern, and it taught America the harsh reality that would define its future. Industrial power wins wars, not courage alone. The North had factories, the South had bravery, but bravery couldn't outmatch steel. After 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed, the war ended, but the lessons stayed. America realized that a modern nation requires a modern military. Not just soldiers, but systems. Not just weapons, but industries. Not just bravery, but strategy. And slowly, painfully, the country rebuilt. But now with a new awareness. The world was changing, and America had to prepare for it. The Navy, once tiny and outdated, began to grow. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Wooden ships transformed into steel warships. Sails became steam engines. Short cannons became long-range guns. A question began to quietly echo through political halls and military bases. What if America didn't just defend itself? What if America led? And that question found its answer in 1898, the Spanish-American War. A short war, a fast war, but a war that shocked the world. American ships moved with incredible speed. American guns hit targets miles away. American soldiers landed, advanced, and captured territory before Europe even understood what was happening. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, a global presence overnight. Suddenly, newspapers in London, Paris, Berlin whispered, "America is rising." Old empires felt a chill. New nations felt curiosity. And America itself felt a spark. a spark that would one day become a flame that would one day become a furnace that would forge the most powerful military the world had ever seen. But that incredible future, world wars, Cold War, nuclear power, global bases, all of it begins right here, with fear, with courage, with mistakes, with survival, with a nation learning step by step how to stand and how to fight. And trust me, the next part, it gets even more intense, because the real rise, the unstoppable rise, starts right after this.
And here's the thing. When the 1800s rolled in, America was still young, still shaky, still learning how to balance freedom with responsibility. The revolution had created a nation, the Industrial Revolution was transforming it, and the Civil War had nearly destroyed it. But once the Civil War ended, something strange happened. A nation that had just bled itself dry suddenly became hungry. Hungry for growth, hungry for influence, hungry for a place in the world. It's almost like pain had unlocked a new kind of ambition. Factories that once produced weapons for brother-against-brother violence now began producing machines, steel beams, locomotives, and industrial equipment. The railroads expanded like wildfire, cutting across forests, deserts, mountains, and plains. Every piece of metal hammered in a factory, every track laid under the hot sun, every telegraph pole planted in the dirt, was secretly building something far bigger than transportation. It was building power, not the kind you see on a battlefield, the kind that hides behind the scenes, logistics, speed, communication. And America understood this better than anyone else, because they had lived through a war where slow communication meant death, where soldiers waited for orders that never came, where reinforcements arrived a day late, where a simple telegraph line could turn the tide of a battle. So now, the telegraph became the nervous system of the nation, and the railroads became its veins. For the first time in history, a country could move troops, ammo, food, medical supplies faster than ever before. It didn't look dramatic, it didn't look glorious, but deep down, this was the foundation of a future superpower. Still, even with all this progress, America wasn't seen as a strong military force. Not yet. Europe laughed at American soldiers, cowboys with rifles, undisciplined militias, a country of farmers pretending to be an army. Comments like these stung, and maybe that's why America kept pushing. Between 1800 and 1900, the U.S. took part in several small wars, not massive, not world-changing, but important stepping stones. The War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, conflicts with native tribes, naval disputes, territorial skirmishes. Every one of these fights, no matter how small, added tiny bricks to America's military identity. The War of 1812 taught America to defend its coastlines. The Mexican War taught it to project power into foreign territory. Conflicts in the West taught it mobility, scouting, survival, rapid engagement. The U.S. Navy slowly shifted from wooden ships to iron hulls. It wasn't the biggest, not even the second biggest, but it was modernizing, upgrading, preparing, quietly. Because sometimes the strongest storms are the ones you don't see forming. By the late 1800s, America had grown into a massive industrial engine. Steel mills thundered day and night. Coal mines fueled entire states. Factories turned raw materials into iron giants. And people were changing too. Immigrants arriving from all over the world, bringing skills, strength, dreams, and a hunger to build something new. Cities rose like steel forests, skyscrapers pierced the sky, money flowed, energy buzzed through every street. And underneath all this growth, a question kept whispering in the minds of powerful men. How long will America stay quiet? Because great nations rarely stay silent forever. And in 1898, America finally spoke. It started with Cuba, a Spanish colony struggling for independence, rebels fighting against harsh rule, people starving,
cities burning, newspapers in America publishing dramatic headlines, women starving in Havana, Spanish cruelty exposed, Americans must act. Some of it was true, some of it was exaggerated, but something was building, something explosive. Then it happened. The USS Maine, an American battleship stationed near Havana, suddenly exploded. Boom! 260 American sailors died instantly. To this day, historians debate whether it was an accident or sabotage, but back then, people didn't care. They demanded justice, they wanted action, they wanted war. And the government listened. The Spanish-American War began. Nobody, not even America, expected what came next. The U.S. Navy moved like lightning. New steel warships sliced through the ocean, powered by modern engines, guided by telegraph communication, and manned by crews trained with precision. Spain, once a mighty empire, now seemed slow, old, outdated. American ships destroyed the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay in a single morning. Not in weeks, not even days, in hours. The world blinked. What just happened? America did that? America? Reporters in Europe scrambled to understand the sudden shift. Generals in Germany, Britain, and France raised their eyebrows. Politicians exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the America they remembered. This wasn't the America they mocked. This was something new, a country that had mastered industry, a country with fast ships and long-range guns, a country that moved with purpose, speed, and striking confidence. And it didn't stop there. Troops captured Cuba. Troops took Puerto Rico. Troops stormed the Philippines. Every victory came faster than predictions. Every battle ended before Europe even reacted. America had stepped onto the global stage, not quietly, but with a thunderclap. Suddenly, maps changed. New territories appeared under American control. Naval bases expanded across the Pacific. Trade routes opened. Political influence exploded. And the world, the entire world, realized something they had ignored for too long. America wasn't just a country anymore. It was becoming a power, a rising power, a restless power. A power shaped not by centuries of monarchy, but by raw ambition, industrial strength, and fearless adaptation. Think about it. A nation born from rebellion, trained through struggle, forged by civil war, strengthened by industry, sharpened by victory. Each era adding a new layer, each battle adding a new lesson, each innovation adding a new weapon. And now, as the 20th century approached, a question began to echo across every major capital in the world. If America can do this in a small war, what happens when it enters a global one? Nobody knew the answer. Not yet. But one thing was clear. The young nation that once hid behind trees with rusty muskets, that once marched barefoot through the snow, that once struggled just to survive, had now unlocked a new identity. It had tasted international power, it had tested its modern navy, it had mastered industrial warfare, and most importantly, it had discovered that the world listens when America decides to speak. This was not the end of the story. This was the beginning. Because the real transformation, the one that would shape the 1900s, the one that would decide world wars, the one that would put America at the very top, was waiting just around the corner. A storm was coming, a storm the world had never seen before. And America, for the first time ever, was ready.
Listen carefully, because this is not just a story of battles and dates. It is the story of a nation forced to awaken, forced to adapt, and forced to discover its true strength, under fire, under pressure, and under threat from the most powerful armies on Earth. Before 1939, the United States wasn't a military superpower. Its army was modest, scattered, and in many ways untested. It had experience, yes, from World War I, but decades of relative peace and isolation had dulled its readiness. Modern tanks, aircraft, and naval strategies existed elsewhere, in Europe and Japan, but the U.S. was still cautiously preparing, quietly observing, and hoping that the storm raging abroad would never reach its shores. The world was changing rapidly. Germany's mechanized warfare, the Blitzkrieg, shattered nations overnight. Japan was expanding its empire across Asia. Europe was engulfed in fire, but most Americans believed they could stay distant, untouched, and safe. Yet history has a way of choosing moments you cannot ignore. December 7, 1941. A morning like any other, calm, serene at Pearl Harbor. Sailors enjoyed breakfast. Engineers checked their ships. Aircraft squadrons lined the decks, engines humming softly. The sun rose on a navy that seemed formidable, yet untested against the chaos that would strike. And then it came. Out of the clear sky, Japanese aircraft appeared, shadows against the light. Bombs fell, explosions ripped through ships, smoke filled the harbor. The USS Arizona, once proud and steady, was engulfed in flames. Hundreds of men were trapped below decks. The water boiled around burning wreckage. By the end of the attack, more than 2,400 Americans were dead, 300 aircraft destroyed, and nearly 20 ships sunk or damaged. This single day changed the course of American history. It jolted a nation awake. The President, Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress the following day, famously calling it a date which will live in infamy. The United States had no choice but to enter the war. From that moment, the country transformed with a speed no one had anticipated. Factories that had produced cars, appliances, and consumer goods were suddenly converted to produce tanks, ships, and aircraft. Steel mills roared night and day. Every available worker, machine, and resource focused on the war effort. The production was staggering. Hundreds of tanks rolled off assembly lines each month. Aircraft were built in the thousands, ready to fly across oceans to battlefields in Europe and the Pacific. Battleships and destroyers launched into the sea at a pace that stunned both allies and enemies alike. This wasn't just industrial output, it was the heartbeat of a nation determined to survive and dominate. But while the factories hummed, the human element was just as crucial. Millions of men were drafted into service, leaving enormous gaps in the workforce. And that gap was filled by women, the hidden backbone of the military effort. They worked in munitions factories, assembling aircraft, welding tanks, and manning machinery that required precision and skill. Every rivet hammered, every bolt tightened, every plane tested by these women meant soldiers overseas had better tools, better chances, and better hope. They became symbols of resilience. The image of Rosie the Riveter wasn't just propaganda. It embodied determination, pride, and the sheer will of a nation. Women were no longer spectators. They were participants essential to the war effort, proving that victory relied on everyone contributing, on every hand pushing the nation forward. Amidst factories and assembly lines, a secret project quietly began, one that would ultimately reshape the entire landscape of warfare. The Manhattan Project recruited the brightest scientists, engineers, and mathematicians in absolute secrecy. In hidden laboratories, calculations were scribbled on blackboards, experiments ran day and night, and teams worked tirelessly to unlock the destructive potential of the atom. Nobody could have imagined the consequences. Nobody could have predicted that a single invention, quietly incubated in silence, would one day end a war and forever alter global military strategy. Meanwhile, soldiers trained relentlessly for conflicts they could scarcely envision. Tanks rolled across test grounds, learning to maneuver through rough terrain. Pilots practiced aerial combat for skies far from home. Naval crews drilled on the oceans, perfecting coordination, precision, and rapid response. Every preparation was part of a larger strategy, to defeat Germany in Europe and Japan in the Pacific, to project power on a global scale. To cement America's reputation as a military force no enemy could ignore. And slowly, steadily, the pieces began to fit together. Industry, human willpower, science, and strategy all converged into a machine of war, but it wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made, lives were lost, lessons were painfully learned. Yet each error only made the next plan more precise, more calculated, more unstoppable. By 1942, the United States was no longer a sleeping giant. It was awake, it was organized, it was armed. And it was ready to enter a conflict that would span oceans, continents, and generations. The story doesn't end here. Because the real turning points, the battles, the strategies, the innovations that would crush Germany and Japan were still ahead. Pearl Harbor had lit the fire. Now the flames were spreading across the globe. And that fire would forge America into something it had never been before, a true superpower, a nation capable of projecting strength anywhere, at any time, and with unmatched coordination. The year 1942 arrived with a harsh reality. The United States was fully at war, yet the path ahead was uncertain, chaotic, and perilous. Soldiers trained, ships sailed, planes roared in the skies, but every victory, every plan carried the weight of lives, mistakes, and untested strategy. Across the Atlantic, Germany's military machine still terrorized Europe. Blitzkrieg tactics had shattered France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Cities crumbled under rapid armored assaults. Americans watched with growing urgency. The Allies needed help and fast. In the Pacific, Japan continued its relentless expansion. Islands fell one by one, resources were seized. Naval power dominated wide swathes of ocean. Pearl Harbor had awakened the giant, but now it was time to move, to strike back, and to learn the brutal art of modern war on two distant fronts. Factory America's industrial might in full swing. The true power of the United States lay not only in its soldiers, but in its factories. Across cities and small towns, industry hummed at an unprecedented pace. Tanks rolled off assembly lines with mechanical precision. Aircraft flooded the skies, new models designed for speed, durability, and long-range missions. Shipyards launched battleships, aircraft carriers, and destroyers at astonishing rates. Every rivet, every engine, every weapon was a testament to American innovation. This wasn't merely mass production, it was a transformation of the national psyche. The country itself had become a weapon. Workers, engineers, and scientists understood the stakes. Victory depended on coordination, on relentless output, and on flawless execution. And among them, women continued to shine. Their contribution was silent but undeniable. They became pilots ferrying aircraft, welders shaping steel, and munitions experts handling explosives with careful hands. Without them, the machinery of war would falter. They weren't just supporting the war, they were the backbone, the invisible pulse keeping the nation alive and strong. Radioactive Manhattan Project, the shadow weapon. Meanwhile, in top-secret facilities scattered across the country, a different battle was being fought. The Manhattan Project had grown into a massive undertaking. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and technicians collaborated under the highest secrecy. Nuclear physics, a science previously theoretical, became the foundation of an unstoppable new weapon. Time was critical. Reports from Europe and the Pacific suggested the Axis powers were exploring similar technologies. America could not afford delays or mistakes. Every calculation mattered. Every test could be the difference between winning the war and losing it. By 1945, the Manhattan Project culminated in a weapon so devastating it could end entire cities in an instant. The atomic bomb would not only defeat enemies, but would also redefine global power forever. Cross strategies against Germany and Japan. America's military didn't just rely on firepower. Strategy was equally vital. In Europe, American forces joined with the British and Free French troops. Careful planning, intelligence operations, and coordination with allies were essential. Amphibious landings, air raids, and coordinated tank offensives required precision at every level. From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Paris, American soldiers learned, adapted, and overcame. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, island hopping became the key tactic against Japan. Strategically choosing targets, securing supply lines, and isolating Japanese strongholds allowed America to advance without overextending. Each battle taught lessons about logistics, air superiority, and naval coordination. Every victory was a step closer to Japan's eventual surrender. Globes showing Europe, Africa, forging a global military reputation. By the end of the war in 1945, the United States had transformed completely. From a cautious, modest military in 1939 to a global superpower capable of striking anywhere on the planet. The combination of industrial might, scientific innovation, and human courage had forged an unshakable reputation. Allies respected it, enemies feared it. The world had witnessed a nation that could mobilize resources, train soldiers, innovate technology, and coordinate complex operations on multiple continents simultaneously. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki showcased the terrifying reach of American military power. Germany had already fallen, Japan had surrendered. But the lesson was clear: America had arrived, not just as a participant, but as a dominant force whose influence would shape global politics, defense, and strategy for decades to come. By 1945, the United States had learned a profound truth. Victory depended not on luck, not on one general or one battlefield, but on the synergy of human determination, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and strategic foresight. Every soldier, every worker, every scientist, every pilot had played a role. Every sacrifice mattered. And when the smoke cleared, America stood as a nation transformed, a superpower. Respected, feared, and ready to take its place on the world stage. The journey from cautious observer to global military leader had been forged in fire, sweat, and blood. World War II had turned a young, sleepwalking nation into the world's most formidable power, and the lessons of that transformation would echo for generations.
Listen closely. The world had survived 2 massive wars, but peace proved to be fragile. In 1947, a new kind of tension gripped the globe. Not open warfare, but a quiet, calculating struggle that would last decades. The stage was set for the Cold War, a battle not of bullets alone, but of ideology, influence, and unmatched ambition. On one side stood the United States of America, victorious, industrially dominant, armed with the most advanced technology, and confident in its global reach. On the other side, the Soviet Union, a sprawling, ideologically rigid state, determined to expand its power and ideology across Europe and beyond. The world now had 2 superpowers, 2 giants, circling each other, wary, calculating, and ready to strike if provoked. The nuclear arms race begins. The shadow of the atomic bomb hung heavy over international politics. America's use of nuclear weapons in 1945 had already demonstrated unprecedented, destructive potential. The Soviet Union watched closely, determined to not fall behind. By 1949, the USSR had tested its first atomic bomb. A new arms race was born. Tension soared. Leaders on both sides realized that nuclear capability was not just a weapon. It was leverage, power, and a deterrent. Every new missile, every new warhead was measured, calculated, and broadcast as a statement. A signal to the other side. We have the power. We can strike. Don't test us. The world trembled under this quiet but pervasive threat. Missiles could destroy cities in minutes, yet nations never fired. Because both sides understood the cost of failure. This was the era of mutually assured destruction. Peace existed not because of diplomacy alone, but because annihilation was the ultimate deterrent. The space race, NASA versus Soviet. As if nuclear weapons weren't enough, competition extended beyond Earth. The space race became a new theater of rivalry. In 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. The world watched in awe and anxiety. If the Soviets could launch satellites, could they also launch nuclear warheads from space? America answered decisively. In 1958, NASA was formed. Hundreds of scientists, engineers, and astronauts worked tirelessly, fueled by ambition and national pride. Explorer 1 reached orbit in 1958. Then came Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. Each mission a declaration. The United States was capable, innovative, and a technological leader. Every rocket, every orbit, every successful launch wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a message. The Cold War had extended to the heavens. CIA covert operations, influence behind the scenes. Beyond space and nuclear weapons, America fought in shadows. The Central Intelligence Agency became the unseen hand, shaping conflicts, influencing governments, and protecting American interests abroad. From Iran to Latin America, from Southeast Asia to Europe, covert missions were executed with precision and secrecy. Some operations prevented hostile governments from rising. Others secured natural resources, intelligence, and strategic positions. Every success was invisible to the public, yet profoundly impactful, and every failure carried risks, political scandals, international tension, even military confrontation. The CIA became a symbol of America's willingness to act decisively, sometimes in darkness, to protect its global standing. Korean War and Vietnam War, military lessons. The Cold War also played out in more visible theaters. Korea and Vietnam became proving grounds for strategy, tactics, and lessons in modern warfare. In Korea, 1950-1953, American troops faced a well-equipped communist army. Harsh winters, mountainous terrain, and a determined enemy taught the U.S. military new operational strategies. Combined arms operations, aerial support, logistics planning, every challenge shaped the Army's future doctrine. Vietnam, 1955 to 1975, presented different trials. Jungle warfare, guerrilla tactics, and political complexity forced a reconsideration of traditional military methods. Victory was elusive, but knowledge gained was invaluable. Every operation, every misstep, added to a growing military intelligence database that would define future conflicts. NATO, establishing a U.S.-led military network. As threats spread across continents, America sought to solidify its alliances. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed in 1949, creating a structured military alliance with Europe. This network allowed for rapid troop deployment, coordinated defense, and shared intelligence. It also sent a clear signal. America was committed to protecting its allies and countering Soviet expansion. Through NATO, the U.S. extended influence without direct warfare in every conflict zone. It became a stabilizing force, a deterrent, and a platform to project military power across continents. Arms production boom. The Cold War drove America's industrial machine to new heights. Arms production surged beyond even World War II levels. Missiles, tanks, aircraft, submarines, all were designed, tested, and produced at unprecedented scales. Factories became modern fortresses of innovation. Laborers and engineers pored over designs, prototypes, and blueprints, ensuring every weapon met exacting standards. The country had learned that military strength wasn't just soldiers. It was infrastructure, technology, and the ability to mobilize quickly. The Cold War marched forward like a long, unending winter. Silent, tense, unpredictable. The United States had grown stronger, smarter, and more cautious, but the world around it shifted constantly. Every decision carried weight. Every mistake could ignite a global fire. And through it all, America learned a painful but powerful truth. Strength is not a moment. It's a constant, relentless evolution. The world becomes a chessboard. By the 1960s, the planet wasn't just divided. It was a giant chessboard. Two superpowers moved their pieces carefully, calculating every countermove. America watched the Soviet Union expand its influence across Eastern Europe. From Berlin to Prague, from Warsaw to Budapest, the Iron Curtain felt like an iron fist, understood something deeper. Military strength wasn't only about winning battles. It was about preventing them. So America adapted. Diplomats negotiated. Generals strategized. Spies collected whispers from the darkest corners of the world. Technology raced forward. And behind every decision was one burning fear: nuclear war. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and everything could end. This fear didn't weaken America. It sharpened it. Nuclear weapons, not just power, but pressure. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, nuclear weapons shaped global politics more than any army. Missiles grew faster, smarter, deadlier. Submarines carried warheads beneath the oceans, hidden and silent. Bombers patrolled the skies, signaling readiness. But here's the twist most people forget. America wasn't building nukes to use them. It was building them to avoid war. Mind game. A psychological battlefield. A warning to the USSR, we can destroy you, so don't push too far. Every upgrade, every test explosion, every missile launch was a message. A signal in a world where silence was dangerous. And ironically, it worked. The more powerful America became, the fewer countries dared to start a fight. Space race aftershock. The military advantage no one expected. When NASA sent astronauts into space, the world celebrated science. But behind the scenes, the USS military saw something else. Space meant surveillance, communication dominance, and intelligence superiority. Satellites could track Soviet missiles. They could guide American ships. They could intercept radio signals across continents. Space wasn't just exploration. It was a battlefield without bullets. And America took the lead. The moon landing in 1969 wasn't only a historical achievement, it was a global declaration. If we can reach the moon, we can out-engineer any threat on Earth. Twist after twist, surprise after surprise, America wasn't becoming stronger by chance. It was becoming stronger by mastering every new frontier. CIA, the Shadow Army. While the world watched astronauts and politicians, an invisible war raged silently. The CIA worked in shadows, quietly shaping global politics. Iran, Cuba, Chile, Vietnam, Afghanistan. Small events could trigger big consequences. The CIA wasn't just gathering intel. It was influencing governments, preventing coups, creating alliances, and sometimes stopping Soviet expansion without firing a single American bullet. Some missions succeeded, some failed. Some became global controversies, but every operation sharpened America's understanding of global power. Twist: while the USSR relied on military pressure, America relied on information control, psychological warfare, and covert influence. This made the US dangerous in a different way. Unpredictable, strategic, silent. Korean War, the first test. The Korean War was America's first big Cold War battlefield, a divided peninsula. Communism on one side, democracy on the other. Intervened fast. Why? Because losing Korea meant losing Asia, and losing Asia meant losing influence. American troops fought through brutal winters, sudden ambushes, and fierce resistance. But the real lesson wasn't about winning or losing. It was about adapting. Better logistics, better coordination, better air support, better global strategy. The war ended in stalemate, but America walked away smarter, more coordinated, more experienced. Vietnam War, the hardest chapter. Vietnam was different. Dense jungles, invisible enemies, guerrilla tactics. A war where technology mattered less and patience mattered more. America struggled here. And yes, it faced setbacks. But even failures became teachers. Learned how to counter guerrilla warfare, how to use helicopters in modern combat, how to coordinate long-term operations, how political strategy shapes battlefield outcomes. Vietnam hurt, but it also forced America to evolve its military doctrine. It exposed weaknesses, which the US had, later transformed into strengths. Every scar became a blueprint for future power. NATO grows stronger. America builds a global web. NATO wasn't just an alliance. It was America's global military network. Bases in Europe, airfields in Turkey, naval routes in the Atlantic. A system so vast, so coordinated, that the Soviet Union knew any attack on Europe meant war with the entire Western world. America didn't need to fight everywhere. It built partnerships so the fight came to its advantage. Twist: while the USSR built walls, America built alliances, and alliances are harder to defeat. The arms boom. Factories become war machines. Back home, something massive was happening. Factories weren't making consumer goods anymore. They were making jets, missiles, radars, tanks, and every tool needed for modern warfare. The entire economy adapted. Giants. Technology boomed. Research expanded. Bills passed in Congress gave billions to military innovation. This wasn't a temporary boost. It became permanent. A system, a cycle, a powerhouse. By the 1980s, America's military budget was larger than the next several nations combined. The Cold War starts to crack. Then came the final twist, the one that changed everything. The Soviet economy weakened. Resources depleted. Wars cost money. Technology lagged behind. Alliances crumbled. The USSR simply couldn't keep up with American spending, American innovation, American global networks, American intelligence systems, and American military expansion. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. And the world looked around and realized there was only one superpower left, only one unmatched military force, only one global leader: the United States. Not because of luck, not because of one war, but because for 44 long years, America evolved, learned, innovated, adapted, survived, and ultimately outperformed every rival on Earth. The world didn't realize it at first. But the moment the 1990s began, America was entering a new phase of military evolution. For more than a century, they had climbed step by step, from a struggling revolutionary force to a global presence after World War II, to a nuclear giant during the Cold War. But the 1991 Gulf War, that was the spark that lit a whole new era. An era where wars were no longer won only by courage, manpower, or strategy, but by technology. It was the beginning of the age where America would use satellites instead of scouts, stealth instead of raw firepower, and drones instead of battalions. It was the moment when the world finally understood. This is how a superpower stays ahead. Gulf War, the night the world saw precision warfare. Picture this: a silent desert night in Iraq. Sandstorms sleeping. No sound except the hum of distant engines. On the ground expecting a traditional clash. Tanks versus tanks, troops versus troops. But then, the sky lit up. American jets flew in like ghosts. No chaotic bombing. No random destruction. Each missile curved through the darkness, as if guided by some invisible hand, and hit its target with frightening accuracy. This wasn't war as the world knew it. This was something else entirely. CNN cameras captured those green-tinted night vision strikes, missiles traveling in real time, steering themselves inside bunkers, through windows, into exact coordinates. The world whispered one sentence: this is a new kind of war. The Gulf War proved America had entered a technological age where they could see, track, and destroy with almost surgical precision. It shook nations, it terrified enemies, and it sent a clear message. Technology was now America's greatest weapon. Stealth technology, the art of becoming invisible. But the Gulf War was only the opening act. What followed was something that felt almost unreal. While the world was still trying to modernize its aircraft, America had secretly built machines that didn't just fly, they disappeared. The F-117 Nighthawk, a jet made of sharp angles, black surfaces, designed so radar waves wouldn't bounce back. To the enemy radar, it wasn't a plane. It was nothing. Then came the B-2 Spirit, a flying wing so smooth, so alien-looking, that even American citizens thought it came straight out of a sci-fi film. It could fly deep into enemy territory, drop bombs with pinpoint accuracy, and leave without being detected. And just when the world tried to catch up, America took another leap. F-22 Raptor, the first true fifth-generation fighter, dominant in speed, stealth, sensors. F-35 Lightning II, a global project, a war machine with so many interconnected systems that it almost felt alive. Stealth wasn't just technology, it was psychology. It made enemies doubt their own radars, their own defenses, their own safety. And America embraced it because they knew, if the enemy can't see you, they can't stop you. Drone warfare, when the pilot is thousands of miles away. The early 2000s changed the nature of conflict in a way no one expected. The enemy was no longer a uniformed army. They hid in caves, deserts, crowded villages, appearing like shadows, disappearing like dust. America realized it needed eyes in the sky that never blink, never sleep, never hesitate. Thus came the drones. The MQ-1 Predator first, then the deadlier MQ-9 Reaper. A drone would fly over mountains in Afghanistan, while its pilot sat in a comfortable chair in Nevada. Thousands of miles away, drinking coffee, yet controlling life and death decisions. This wasn't science fiction. This was modern warfare. Drones could hover for hours, watching a single house, tracking a single man, listening to whispers, measuring heat signatures, and when the moment came, a missile would drop, silent and exact. It scared America's enemies not because of the explosion, but because they finally understood. You can run from soldiers, you can hide from airplanes, but you cannot escape a machine that never gets tired. And in that moment, a new type of war began. AI-assisted, remote-controlled, emotionless. Space-based surveillance. Eyes watching from the heavens. While other countries tried to add more troops or tanks, America was expanding its battlefield upward, into space. Satellites that could track movements across continents. Not just troop formations, but heat signatures of missile silos, communication frequencies, even underground bunkers. A tank moved 2 inches, the satellite saw it. A missile silo opened its lid for maintenance, the satellite recorded it. A general turned on a secure phone, The satellite marked the signal. These weren't just metal boxes orbiting Earth. They were silent watchmen. From thousands of miles above, America could look down on any battlefield as if it were a map table in the Pentagon. This changed everything. War was no longer fought blind. America knew where the enemy was before the enemy even knew where they were. That was dominance. That was control. That was the new age of military intelligence. GPS, a small signal that rules the modern battlefield. Today we use GPS for driving, delivery, taxis, and apps. But its true root lies in war. During the rise of modern American military power, GPS became the invisible nervous system of the entire machine. A missile could hit a window from miles away because of GPS. A drone could navigate through hostile mountains because of GPS. A tank could maneuver at night without lights because of GPS. Even soldiers on foot had GPS receivers guiding them through deserts and cities. The world didn't realize it, but while everyone else was using maps, America was using satellites to fight. GPS turned the U.S. military into something frighteningly efficient, a force that knew its exact location, its enemy's exact location, and the safest path to victory. Aircraft carriers, floating islands of war. Then came the giants, the symbols of American power, the moving cities of steel. Aircraft carriers. Imagine a 100,000-ton floating island with runways, jets, helicopters, radar systems, hospitals, workshops, and thousands of crew. One carrier could project American power to any coastline in the world. Two carriers could shut down a region. A carrier group, with submarines, destroyers, supply ships, was like a traveling empire. A show of force so massive that nations across the world watched it with fear and respect. Wherever an American carrier group arrived, the message was simple: the United States is here. No country, not even Russia or China, has been able to match that scale. Cyber warfare, the invisible battlefield. As technology grew, another warfront quietly opened, one without soldiers or bombs. Cyber war, hackers targeting power stations, malware sneaking into weapon systems, viruses attacking communication grids. And America prepared itself faster than anyone else. Inside the Pentagon, new divisions were created, rooms full of screens, analysts, codebreakers, people who could shut down an enemy radar without firing a bullet, people who could cripple a missile system with a single line of code. America realized that in the modern world, a nation might lose a war before the first shot is fired, and so they built a cyber shield and a cyber sword. Rise of Special Forces, the Shadow Warriors. While technology expanded, America needed soldiers who could operate in the dark corners of the world. Enter the Navy SEALs. These weren't regular soldiers. They trained underwater, in deserts, in frozen mountains. They could jump from planes at midnight, swim miles in freezing water, or sneak into enemy compounds without being detected. When the world's most wanted terrorist was tracked to a compound in Pakistan, it was the SEALs who carried out the mission. Fast, silent, precise. Just like the technology America had perfected. The SEALs represented the human side of America's modern warfare machine, the tip of the spear. But America's rise in technological warfare didn't end with drones or stealth fighters. If anything, those were just the building blocks of something even bigger. A system where every piece, every soldier, every aircraft, every satellite, every carrier group, all became part of one connected machine. A machine built not just to fight wars, but to shape them. Because by the late 1990s and early 2000s, America discovered something powerful. Whoever controls information controls the battlefield. And America, more than anyone else, understood how to weaponize information. For the first time in history, a general sitting inside the Pentagon could see a battlefield on the other side of the planet through satellite feeds, drone videos, encrypted communications, and real-time AI-assisted maps. It wasn't just military intelligence, it was military omniscience. Radio a request, and within seconds, a satellite could provide coordinates, a drone could confirm movement, and a jet 500 miles away could deliver a precision strike. This level of synchronization was unheard of. It was as if the US military had built a nervous system, with satellites as eyes, cyber units as brain synapses, drones as nerves, and special forces as the fingertips. Every piece worked together. Every piece knew its role. Every piece amplified America's reach. And this is what truly elevated the U.S. military beyond every rival: integration. Meanwhile, adversaries were stuck in the past, building tanks, raising battalions, training infantry, while America was building a digital army. But even all this wasn't enough. Because as the world moved into the 21st century, war wasn't just fought in deserts or mountains anymore. It shifted into cities, onto servers, through cables, inside data centers. Robots, sensors, satellites, everything became a potential weapon. And America embraced it faster than anyone. Military drones evolved. At first they only watched. Then they targeted. Then they coordinated with ground forces. Then they worked with artificial intelligence to predict where an enemy might move next. This wasn't just evolution. This was a revolution in warfare where machines weren't just tools. They were partnerships. Hiding in remote mountains, it was terrifying. Imagine hiding in a cave, thinking you outsmarted soldiers, only to realize a silent machine above you has been watching for 5 hours, tracking every movement, waiting patiently for the perfect moment. It wasn't like traditional war. It was like being hunted by a ghost. But the biggest power shift came from the ocean. While drones patrolled the skies and satellites watched the Earth, aircraft carriers became the moving fortresses of the 21st century. Each carrier battle group was like a small nation. Fighter squadrons, missile systems, destroyers, submarines, fuel ships, hospitals, command centers, a floating empire. Wherever a carrier group moved, the balance of power in that region shifted. When a crisis erupted in the Middle East, carrier appeared on the horizon. Tension dropped immediately. When a rogue nation threatened shipping lanes in Asia, a carrier group sailed through the waters. Threats disappeared overnight. It wasn't just physical power. It was psychological power. The kind that says, we can reach you wherever you are, whenever we want. No other country had anything remotely close. And then came cyber warfare, the battlefield without a map. Americans understood something earlier than the rest of the world. Missiles can be intercepted. Tanks can be destroyed. Planes can be grounded. But if you can blind your enemy's radar, shut down their power grid, corrupt their communication, confuse their targeting systems, you win before the fight even begins. Inside heavily secured Pentagon command rooms, teams of cyber warriors worked behind screens, writing code that could penetrate enemy networks, break encryption, shut down infrastructure. In the old world, nations built walls. In the new world, America built firewalls, and they were stronger than any concrete barrier. Cyber soldiers could freeze a missile in its launch silo, or disable a drone mid-flight, or wipe out enemy servers silently. This was the invisible war, and America was winning it nightly. But America didn't rely on machines alone, because even though technology became the backbone, they still needed the human edge, the warriors who operated behind enemy lines under the cover of night. Navy SEALs became legends. Small teams, 12, sometimes 8, sometimes even just 4, would enter hostile territory, complete missions entire armies couldn't, and leave without a trace. They rescued hostages, neutralized high-value targets, conducted reconnaissance in impossible places, and executed missions so complex that many remained classified for years. The combination of technology and elite soldiers created a terrifying synergy. A drone would track a target for days. A satellite would confirm patterns. Cyber units would shut down enemy cameras, and the SEALs would strike with surgical precision. It was the ultimate expression of American military philosophy. Machines gather information. Technology opens the doors, and humans finish the job. As the 2010s came, warfare expanded into new realms. AI algorithms predicting enemy movement. Robots assisting soldiers. Laser-guided weapons with accuracy unthinkable in previous decades. The military wasn't just adapting to modern war, it was defining it. The battlefield turned into a chessboard, and America became the player who dictated the moves. Could see every piece, from every angle, at every moment. Even the sky changed. The F-22 and F-35 weren't just aircraft. They were information hubs. They collected battlefield data, shared it with drones, fed it to command centers, and worked as part of a vast digital network. If an enemy radar switched on, the F-22 saw it instantly. If a missile launched from 60 miles away, the F-35 detected it before the ground crew even realized. These jets didn't just fly, they thought. This wasn't just air superiority. This was air dominance. The kind of dominance where you don't just win dogfights, you end them before they begin. And then there was one last piece, the part of the story most people forget, but the part that truly sealed America's rise in the technological age. Money, industry, scale. While other countries tried to build one or two. Two advanced systems. America built hundreds of jets, thousands of drones, fleets of warships, an ocean of satellites. And behind them, an industrial machine capable of producing more technology than any other nation on Earth. Silicon Valley created chips. Defense contractors built machines. The economy funded innovation at a scale no rival could match. America wasn't just a military superpower, it was a technological superpower. And by 2020, one truth was undeniable. Every war, every conflict, every tension around the globe was influenced by American technology, whether directly or indirectly. The rise wasn't accidental. It wasn't lucky. It wasn't temporary. It was a calculated evolution. Stealth, satellites, drones, carriers, cyber units, special forces, all woven together into a single, unstoppable force. Just witness America's military transformation. It depended on it, and in that dependency, America found its greatest form of power. Global power projection, the World Wide Web of bases, alliances, and economic muscle. From the moment the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a new reality settled over the world. A reality in which one nation stood alone at the top, unmatched, unchallenged, and undisputed. The United States, already a giant, now began shaping a new kind of dominance, not just through weapons, not just through wars, but through geography, alliances, money, trade routes, and global influence, woven like a gigantic invisible web across the planet. This was not just military power. This was global power projection, the ability to influence any event, any region, any conflict, anywhere on Earth.
And it began with a strategy so bold, so massive, that no empire before had ever attempted it.
The Unseen Empire. 800-plus American military bases worldwide. Most countries in the world have a handful of military bases. Some don't even have one outside their borders. But the United States? It built the largest overseas military network in human history. By the early 2000s, the U.S. had air bases, naval bases, drone bases, intelligence hubs, missile defense systems, surveillance stations, logistics hubs, spread across more than 70 countries, totaling 800-plus foreign bases. A soldier could go from Germany to Japan, from South Korea to Bahrain, from Italy to Djibouti, and he would still be standing on American-controlled soil. It was not an empire of colonies. It was an empire of presence. And that presence meant power. A crisis erupts, can deploy troops in hours. A rogue nation threatens its neighbors. American aircraft carriers can appear on the horizon by dawn. A terror cell emerges, drones begin circling overhead before the sun rises. This web of bases became the foundation of American dominance after 1991. Every base was a message. We are here, we are watching, we can act instantly. No empire in history, from the British to the Romans, had ever achieved such global reach. 2. Alliances of power. NATO, AUKUS, Quad. The new geopolitical chessboard. America understood that raw strength alone cannot shape the world. Alliances, that was the real multiplier of power. NATO, the shield of the West. After the Cold War, instead of shrinking, NATO expanded. More members joined. More troops trained under joint command. More nations aligned their defense systems with the U.S. In effect, Europe became an extension of the American defense perimeter. When America spoke, NATO echoed. When America acted, NATO followed. AUKUS, the new Pacific Pact. As China rose, the U.S. needed a counterbalance. Thus came alliances like AUKUS, a deep military partnership between the US, UK, and Australia. This wasn't just friendship. This was technology sharing at the highest level. Nuclear submarines, cyber capability, undersea warfare. The message was clear. The Indo-Pacific would not shift without American permission. Quad, the strategic diamond. Japan, India, Australia, United States. 4 major nations forming a security coalition circling the Indo-Pacific. Not an alliance on paper, but a strategic formation built to stabilize the world's busiest trade routes and to maintain a balance of power in Asia. Together, these alliances created an iron ring around the world, a strategic chessboard where America controlled the center. 3. Economic power, the dollar, defense funding, and the money machine. No military can run without money. No global presence can function without economic muscle. And the United States possessed the strongest economic weapon ever created, the US dollar. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. Oil was traded in dollars. Global loans, international trade, cross-border settlements, everything relied on it. This meant countries needed dollars, which meant the US economy became the heart of the global financial system. And from this financial dominance flowed something even more powerful: unlimited military funding. Could build aircraft carriers worth billions, maintain hundreds of foreign bases, develop next-generation jets, pour money into research labs and military industries without collapsing under the burden. Other nations had to choose: bread for the people or weapons for defense. The US never had to choose. Its economy could handle both. This financial engine didn't just support the military, it turbocharged it. The arms export empire. As the US innovated, something else happened. Other nations wanted American weapons. Fighter jets, drones, missile systems, armored vehicles, radar systems, cyber tools. America became the world's largest arms exporter. Every sale created dependency. If a country bought a US aircraft, it needed US spare parts, US training, US upgrades, US cooperation. It didn't just sell weapons. It sold long-term influence. Each arms deal was a handshake that lasted decades. 5. The Middle East, the center of strategy. After the Gulf War, the United States realized something crucial. Whoever controls the Middle East controls energy, and whoever controls energy controls the global economy. So America set up bases and military presence across the Persian Gulf, Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE. These bases protected oil routes, shipping lanes, and regional allies. More importantly, they secured America's long-term interests. Because oil wasn't just energy, it was power. Every barrel moved through systems influenced by the US. Navy. Every shipping route passed under American surveillance. In the Middle East, America didn't just watch. It shaped events. Sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always from a position of overwhelming presence. 6. Oil, politics, and strategic routes. Look at a world map of oil routes. Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, Suez Canal, Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, Persian Gulf. These routes carried the lifeblood of the global economy. And where were American forces positioned? Exactly there. Aircraft carriers roamed these waters. Drones watched these choke points. Bases sat near strategic coastlines. If any nation threatened global oil flow, the US was there. Navy could arrive in hours. It wasn't just defense. It was global economic guardianship. Or, depending on perspective, global control. Either way, the result was clear. Global trade moved under the shadow of American military strength. 7. Sea power, the kings of the oceans. Empires rise on land, superpowers rise on water. And America built the most powerful navy in human history. Not just ships, floating cities. Aircraft carriers with 5,000 plus personnel, dozens of fighter jets, missile defenses, radar systems, nuclear reactors, logistics fleets. A single carrier group could crush entire air forces of medium-sized nations. By 2000s, the US had more carriers than all other nations combined. The oceans? They didn't belong to anyone, but they were watched over by only one. Wherever an American aircraft carrier sailed, the balance of power shifted instantly. 8. Humanitarian missions. The soft power strategy. Military power alone cannot win hearts. Use something equally powerful. Soft power. Whenever a tsunami hit, earthquake devastated, cyclone destroyed cities, or famine broke out, American ships, helicopters, medics, and aid teams arrived first. This wasn't charity alone. It was strategy. Because when a nation sees American soldiers delivering food, rescuing survivors, rebuilding hospitals, helping children, they don't see a superpower. They see a friend. Soft power helped America build not fear, but acceptance. A soldier with a med kit can sometimes achieve what a soldier with a rifle cannot. And as America expanded its network of bases and alliances, something else quietly solidified its dominance: the rise of the US dollar as the center of the global economy. It didn't happen in one day. It started after World War II. Nations were exhausted, their currencies collapsing, their economies unstable, and in the middle of that chaos, the US dollar stood strong. Stable, predictable, backed by a booming industrial machine and unmatched gold reserves. Slowly, countries realized something powerful. Trading with America felt safer. Saving money in dollars felt safer. And doing business in dollars gave them access to the largest economy on Earth. That decision changed military power forever. Because once the world started using the US dollar, America unlocked an advantage no other nation ever had: limitless military funding. Other nations had to earn money to build their militaries. America simply printed the world's currency. And America needed power. It was a perfect cycle that transformed the US military into a giant that was almost impossible to match. And America didn't just build weapons for itself. It became the world's #1 arms exporter. Fighter jets, missiles, drones, armored vehicles, surveillance systems, everywhere you looked, US technology was shaping the military landscape. Nations bought American weapons not only because they were advanced, but because they came with something else: influence. If you bought US weapons, you trained with US soldiers, you used US software, you depended on US maintenance, US upgrades, US spare parts. The American military spread across the world not just with bases, but with technology embedded deep inside foreign armies. And all of this interconnected perfectly with one region: the Middle East. A land of deserts, conflicts, oil, and unbelievable strategic power. America understood early that whoever controlled the Middle East controlled the flow of global energy. And if you controlled energy, you controlled the future. That's why American soldiers, aircraft, drones, and bases became a permanent part of the region. Every war, every crisis, every uprising, America was there, shaping outcomes, protecting interests, and securing routes that kept the global economy moving. But the Middle East wasn't just about oil. It was about geography: the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal. These weren't just places, they were the arteries of global trade. The entire world depended on them, and America positioned itself exactly where it mattered. A single US carrier strike group could shut down an entire ocean. A single US base could control the sky over thousands of miles. A single American decision could change the price of oil for billions of people. And then came the oceans themselves, the highways of global commerce. Every container ship, every tanker, every supply vessel traveled through waters watched by American eyes. Not because the US was policing the world out of kindness, but because global trade needed stability. And America stepped in as the enforcer. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, American naval power stretched like an invisible shield. With the world's most powerful navy, America controlled the sea lanes that carried 90% of the world's trade. Whoever dominates the seas dominates the world. And America mastered that truth better than any empire in history. But military power is not always about weapons. Sometimes it's about hearts. Sometimes it's about influence. And during disasters, wars, and humanitarian crises, the US military became the first to arrive. Earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, famine. When nations collapsed, American cargo planes landed with supplies. American helicopters dropped food and medicine. American ships turned into floating hospitals. And slowly, The world began to see the U.S. military not just as a force of war, but as a force of rescue. This was the soft power strategy, a quiet but powerful form of influence. Because when America saved lives, people remembered. When America protected refugees, people noticed. And when America stepped in during disasters while other nations remained silent, it shaped the world's perception of who truly held power. Hard power built bases, soft power built loyalty. Together they built something even stronger: trust. And yet, behind all this aid and diplomacy, the U.S. military held a deeper understanding. If you wanted to remain a superpower, you couldn't wait for threats to come to you. You had to spot them before they appeared. And that's what America did with its global presence. It placed troops where trouble was likely to erupt. It positioned ships where tensions could rise. It used alliances as networks of early warning systems. The U.S. military didn't just react to the world, it shaped the world's direction. As the Cold War ended and new threats emerged, terrorism, cyber warfare, rogue states, America adjusted again. It strengthened partnerships, trained foreign armies, shared intelligence, and built coalitions. NATO forces trained with U.S. Marines. Asian allies coordinated with the U.S. Pacific Command. European nations depended on American cyber defense systems. Every alliance was a web, and at the center of that web was the United States. And while these alliances grew stronger, something else was quietly expanding: the spread of U.S. economic influence. The dollar didn't just dominate trade. It dominated banking. It dominated sanctions. When America sanctioned a country, the world followed, because the world couldn't afford to lose access to the U.S. financial system. And that gave the American military unprecedented reach, not just on battlefields, but inside economies, governments, and entire regions. And through all of this, the idea of America as the world's stabilizer, protector, and influencer solidified. Global leaders came to Washington for support. Nations asked the Pentagon for training. Conflicts were judged based on how the U.S. responded. America wasn't just a country. It was a system built on bases, alliances, warships, diplomacy, and economic power. But there was one more piece to this empire, the one that tied everything together. The U.S. Navy's command of global shipping routes meant that America could literally protect or pressure any nation by controlling the flow of trade. And every nation knew it. When American destroyers sailed through disputed waters, tensions shifted. When U.S. aircraft carriers appeared near conflict zones, negotiations changed. The presence of American firepower didn't just signal strength, it shaped decisions. And as the years moved forward, these elements, bases, alliances, economy, sea power, and soft power, wove together into a single reality. America could project power anywhere, anytime, for any reason. It didn't need permission. It didn't need long preparation. Its network was always active, always watching, always ready. This was the final phase of American global dominance, the ability to influence the world not just through bombs or missiles, but through presence, alliances, economics, and strategy. The U.S. military wasn't simply strong, it was everywhere. And because it was everywhere, it shaped everything. And that's how America transformed from a nation with soldiers to a nation with a global military web. From a country with borders to a power with no borders. From a superpower to the superpower. After the attacks of September 11th, 2001, the world changed overnight, and so did America. The skyline of New York, once filled with symbols of power and progress, now stood as a stark reminder of vulnerability. In that instant, the United States realized that traditional military strength alone could no longer guarantee security. The battlefield had expanded. Terrorism had no borders, no uniform, no clear front lines. And the U.S. military needed to transform to face this new kind of enemy. The first lessons came fast. Afghanistan became the proving ground. Soldiers and planners learned the limits of conventional warfare in irregular terrains, against insurgents who melted into the mountains and villages. Supply lines stretched thin. Intelligence became the decisive factor. The importance of special operations, drones, and close coordination with local allies became obvious. Every mission, every raid, every airstrike taught hard lessons. Victory is not only about firepower, it is about adaptability, speed, and understanding an ever-changing enemy. Then came Iraq. It was a different kind of war, but the lessons were just as stark. Urban combat, improvised explosives, and politically complex environments demanded a new approach. The US military had to rethink not only tactics, but also strategy. Training evolved, technology adapted, and doctrine shifted. America began to realize that the wars of the 21st century would not be fought solely with tanks and jets, but with a combination of precision, intelligence, and innovation. And while boots were on the ground, another battlefield was quietly emerging, the digital battlefield. Cyber warfare became as critical as any physical attack. Russia, China, and other nations were developing cyber capabilities that could disrupt infrastructure, communications, and even financial systems. The Pentagon responded by investing heavily in cyber defense and offense. Entire units were created, tasked with monitoring networks, predicting threats, and developing new strategies to counter attacks before they happened. Cyber operations became a constant, invisible layer of defense and offense, intertwined with traditional military operations. Drones evolved from reconnaissance tools into precision strike platforms. The eyes in the sky could now identify targets, follow them, and if necessary, eliminate threats without risking a single soldier. This transformation allowed the military to operate in environments too dangerous for conventional forces, while gathering intelligence in real time. Small, highly trained units could now accomplish what once required divisions of men. And then there was the arms race that had quietly entered the modern age. Hypersonic weapons, capable of traveling faster than 5 times the speed of sound, introduced a new dimension to warfare. Suddenly, speed and precision dominated discussions at the highest levels. The Pentagon invested in both offensive and defensive programs. Predicting where a hypersonic missile might strike became a matter of national security. Traditional defense systems were inadequate. Innovation was no longer optional. It was survival. Amidst these developments, space emerged as the new frontier. The establishment of the U.S. Space Force marked a historic milestone. America recognized that dominance in orbit could define supremacy on Earth. Satellites for reconnaissance, communications, navigation, and missile warning had always been vital, but now they became the backbone of integrated military strategy. The Space Force was created to protect these assets, ensure superiority in space-based systems, and anticipate threats that could cripple entire networks on the ground. Space was no longer science fiction. It was a battlefield. Every innovation, every lesson learned, and every battlefield experience began to shape new doctrines. Warfare was no longer about overwhelming an opponent with sheer numbers. It was about integration, technology, speed, and adaptability. Joint operations became standard. Land, sea, air, space, and cyber domains were interconnected. Command centers coordinated multiple theaters simultaneously. The military's focus shifted from fighting wars of attrition to fighting wars of precision, intelligence, and rapid adaptability. And yet, even as America adapted, it looked ahead to the next 50 years. Planners and strategists considered emerging threats. Rogue states acquiring advanced technology, non-state actors exploiting new digital tools, artificial intelligence changing the speed and complexity of decision-making. Predictive simulations, AI-powered logistics, and autonomous vehicles became central to strategic planning. The U.S. military understood that the world would not wait, and neither could it. America's future military strategy combined lessons from the past with anticipation of the future. Irregular warfare, cyber operations, space dominance, hypersonic weapons, advanced AI, and rapid deployment forces were no longer separate programs. They formed an integrated system. This system allowed the United States to project power globally while remaining adaptable, responsive, and technologically superior. History had shown that adaptation is survival. The 21st century demanded nothing less. The transformation after 9/11 was not just about technology or strategy, it was about mindset. The military learned that enemies would exploit any gap. Terrorist organizations, cyber hackers, and hostile nations studied every weakness. And the U.S. military responded by turning vulnerability into strength. Training evolved, intelligence networks expanded, and technological development accelerated. The goal was not just to respond, but to anticipate. To prevent attacks before they occurred, and to ensure dominance wherever threats emerged. The new doctrine emphasized flexibility. Special operations forces could operate anywhere at any time, supported by drones, cyber tools, and intelligence. Rapid deployment forces ensured that America could respond to crises in hours rather than days. Coordination with allies became seamless, leveraging networks that spanned continents. Military bases, once static, became nodes in a dynamic, global system. The future of warfare was now interconnected, rapid, and multidimensional. By mid-century, planners envisioned a world where conflicts could start anywhere and escalate quickly. Hypersonic weapons, AI-driven drones, cyber intrusions, and space-based operations would define the first strikes and the first defenses. America's military would need to be faster, smarter, and more integrated than ever before. Decisions would be made in seconds, requiring both humans and machines to act in harmony. The lessons of Afghanistan and Iraq, combined with cyber experiences and space capabilities, laid the foundation for this new paradigm. The 21st century also demanded attention to non-traditional threats. Terrorist networks, transnational criminal organizations, and cyber-enabled espionage blurred the lines between war and peace. The military recognized that dominance required influence as much as firepower. Soft power, intelligence, diplomacy, and humanitarian assistance became as important as aircraft carriers and drones. The United States learned that projecting strength often required subtlety, patience, and precision, qualities as vital as any weapon. As the 21st century progressed, the lessons of past wars and emerging technologies began to converge into a single vision: the future of American military dominance. The U.S. military realized that traditional deployments and sheer numbers alone could not guarantee supremacy. Speed, precision, intelligence, and technological integration had become the defining factors. Every conflict, from the deserts of Afghanistan to the cities of Iraq, had shown that success required more than firepower. It required anticipation and adaptability. Cyber warfare grew into a battlefield as real as land or sea. Russia and China developed digital arsenals capable of targeting infrastructure, communication networks, and even civilian systems. In response, the United States built robust cyber defense and offense units, embedding them in every theater of operation. Cyber specialists worked alongside conventional forces, ensuring that physical and digital operations reinforced each other. Wars would no longer be fought solely with bullets and bombs. Computers, satellites, and encrypted networks became frontline weapons. Hypersonic weapons transformed the concept of strike and defense, moving at speeds impossible for conventional defenses to intercept. These missiles demanded new strategies and doctrines. Research into detection, interception, and rapid response became critical. Commanders trained constantly to operate under conditions where the first strike could come from above, across continents, or from the depths of the ocean. The pace of modern conflict accelerated beyond anything seen in the 20th century. Space became not just a domain for exploration, but a theater of defense and control. The establishment of the U.S. Space Force formalized America's commitment to protect assets in orbit. Satellites for surveillance, navigation, communication, and early warning systems were now indispensable. Space operations ensured that drones, aircraft, ships, and cyber operations could function seamlessly anywhere on Earth. Dominance in space meant dominance on the planet below. And America took that lesson seriously, investing billions to maintain an unbroken advantage in orbit. Lessons from asymmetric warfare also informed strategy. Special Operations Forces, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Marine Raiders became the scalpel of the U.S. military. Small, highly trained units could execute surgical strikes with minimal collateral damage. Supported by drones, satellites, and intelligence networks, these forces could neutralize threats before they escalated into larger conflicts. Their operations showed that wars of the future would be surgical, targeted, and data-driven, rather than relying solely on overwhelming manpower. America's global network of alliances multiplied its influence. NATO, AUKUS, Quad, and other partnerships allowed the U.S. to extend power without physically occupying every region. Joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and coordinated operations made the United States the central node in a global security web. Allies provided access, support, and additional capabilities, but decisions and strategies often flowed from Washington. This networked approach ensured that American military influence was persistent, flexible, and pervasive. Economic power remained a core component of military strength. The dollar, still the world's reserve currency, enabled funding for advanced technologies, large-scale operations, and rapid response forces. Defense contractors, innovation labs, and research institutions worked in tandem to push boundaries. Every advancement in AI, drone technology, cyber tools, and hypersonic weaponry was backed by a financial system capable of supporting it indefinitely. Economic influence and military might had fused into an inseparable engine driving global power. America's next 50 years were envisioned with clarity. Wars would be fast, global, and multi-domain. AI-driven decision-making would assist commanders in making rapid, precise judgments. Autonomous systems could operate in contested environments, reducing risk to human soldiers. Space-based systems would monitor activity anywhere on the planet. Hypersonic strikes could neutralize emerging threats before they escalated. Cyber capabilities would disrupt enemy operations and protect critical infrastructure. And yet, human judgment, strategy, and leadership would remain essential. Machines would assist, not replace, the art of warfare. The military's philosophy evolved: prevention through dominance. By projecting presence, readiness, and technological superiority, the U.S. could deter conflicts before they began. Precision, speed, and global reach allowed America to influence decisions of allies and adversaries alike. The future doctrine emphasized integration: land, sea, air, space, cyber, and economic power all synchronized to produce a seamless effect. Every region of the world became a potential theater, every technology a tool, every alliance a force multiplier. At the same time, the U.S. military embraced flexibility and resilience. Threats would be unpredictable. Non-state actors, rogue nations, and technological adversaries would challenge norms. America's response needed to be adaptable, agile, and intelligent. Training and strategy incorporated lessons from counterinsurgency, urban combat, cyber operations, and global intelligence. Every soldier, operator, and planner understood that the battlefield of tomorrow was dynamic, unpredictable, and multidimensional. Looking ahead, America anticipated that space and cyber domains would dominate strategy. Satellites would monitor global activities, AI systems would assist in predictive analysis, and cyber units could preemptively neutralize threats. Rapid deployment forces, special operations units, and integrated air-sea commands ensured that anywhere a threat emerged, America could respond immediately. Hypersonic weapons provided strategic deterrence, forcing adversaries to think twice before challenging U.S. supremacy. Humanitarian operations continued to play a vital role. While technology and strategy ensured dominance, soft power built legitimacy and goodwill. Disaster relief, medical missions, and reconstruction efforts enhanced America's global image and created opportunities for influence without force. The U.S. military became not just a tool of war, but an instrument of stability and trust. Power projected responsibly, combined with advanced technology, created an unbeatable combination. Hard, soft, and digital dominance rolled into one. By 2050, the predictions were clear. America would not remain static. Its military would continue to adapt to emerging technologies, evolving threats, and changing global dynamics. Autonomous systems, advanced AI, quantum computing, cyber warfare, and space dominance would define operations. Alliances and global partnerships would remain crucial. Bases, carriers, satellites, and networks would ensure continuous presence. And the integration of all domains, physical, digital, economic, and humanitarian, would allow the United States to maintain unmatched influence over world affairs. The story of the 21st century is one of adaptation, foresight, and integration. From the ashes of 9/11 to the high-tech battlefields of cyberspace and space, America reshaped its military to meet the demands of a complex, interconnected world. Every decision, every innovation, every alliance contributed to a system capable of responding instantly, globally, and with precision. The United States learned that modern warfare was not only about strength, it was about intelligence, speed, adaptability, and presence. And in mastering these elements, America ensured that its military would remain the defining force of the century and beyond. The century ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the U.S. military will continue to evolve, innovate, and dominate. From counterterrorism and cyber operations to space and hypersonic warfare, every new challenge will be met with preparation and precision. History has proven that when America adapts, it prevails. And as the next 50 years unfold, the strategy, foresight, and integrated power of the United States will shape not just conflicts, but the global balance of power itself. The 21st century has shown that dominance is no longer measured by the size of armies alone, but by the ability to control multiple domains simultaneously. The United States, through lessons learned, technological innovation, and strategic foresight, has positioned itself to meet every challenge. The integration of cyber, space, air, sea, land, and economic influence creates a resilience and reach unmatched in history. America's next chapter is already being written in data centers, satellite control rooms, drone command centers, and strategic planning offices around the globe. And as history continues to unfold, the future of American military strategy will remain rooted in one essential truth: adaptation and integration are the ultimate forms of strength. Whether confronting terrorism, cyber threats, rogue states, or technological rivals, the United States has ensured that its military will remain a global force capable of shaping events, deterring aggression, and defending its interests for decades to come.